gentlemen, fellas, other dudes, guy bros. We already broke 2 of the rules. Rules 1 and 2. Because we talked about it. Or did we? I don't know. I was asleep or I was awake. I don't know anymore. Fight Club! How are you guys doing?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you for asking. How are you?
You're welcome. I'm okay. I'm alright.
Okay, yeah.
I'm a little beat up. This is a lot of things happen in this basement, But I'm gonna stop being so meta. Fight Club is a 1999 American film, and me and Zach discussed the genre, and we don't know what genre. We pinned it down, but I'm gonna shrink it a little bit for time's sake. And I already talked about it too long. Psychological crime thriller. We're gonna go with that. Directed by Alien 3 director David Fincher.
Yes.
That's, I think, Gone Girl too.
Yeah.
And based on the book of the same name by Chuck Palahniuk, Edward Norton plays the unnamed narrator, or is he, who is discontented with his white-collar job at a highly esteemed car company that is probably Jeep. He forms a fight club with soap salesman Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt, who has acted in all the acting things for acting, who he meets randomly on a plane and becomes embroiled in a strange relationship with serious black murderer Helena Bonham Carter. And there's a fight club, and buildings explode and grunge. What did you guys think of Fight Club?
Okay. So we've talked about a few films on the podcast that I've described as being victims of their own reputation. I think kind of in a slight twist on that, Fight Club, I think, is less a victim of its own reputation and more a victim of its own audience. There are so many hardcore dudes who saw this movie in their freshman year of college and thought it was the sickest thing ever, bro, and now they were cinephiles. But a lot of the time, we'll talk about this. We have already talked about this, but we'll talk about this to a somewhat greater extent in our next episode after this one, which we've already recorded. But I think a lot of the time, those people who really praise Fight Club and call it an awesome movie about men being men don't quite grasp the message of the movie, and I think it means that it's very easy to go into Fight Club with an immediately eye-rolling attitude of oh boy, all right, this is the movie with the soap, and you don't talk about Fight Club, and okay, I've seen all this stuff. That being said, if you can set all that aside, I do think it's quite a good movie. I really enjoy it. I think David Fincher is a really good director. He's a very clever director, I think, and he's a very detail-oriented director. And visually, there's so many really individual, creative quirks and touches to this film that I think make it work on a rewatch. Probably a rewatch spaced out from each other. But I do think that there's things that you can kind of spot in the background and in the style of this movie on subsequent viewings that maybe help to kind of bolster up a plot that you kind of get the first time round. I haven't read the book, so I can't say how well it adapts the original story. I do think, because we'll probably talk about this a little bit later as well, though. Christian, you mentioned, I think, in your very first review, how this movie kind of commits a lot of the capitalist sins that it kind of decries throughout. I think that's kind of deliberate, and I do think that's part of the purpose. I have to wonder if that maybe comes across a little more deliberately in the book than it does in the movie. I can't really say at this point. But I am convinced that Chuck Palahniuk is a clever man, and I'm convinced that David Fincher is a clever man, and I think it's just kind of the burden of fan base and critical evaluation that weighs so heavily on this film that it's very easy to go into it and just go, I don't know. It was okay. So all that being said, it sounds like I'm gonna jump out here and praise this film with a 5 out of 5. I gave this movie a 3, and it's probably toward the bottom of my David Fincher rankings because there's just other David Fincher movies I like more. But I do think it's good, and I do think it's worth watching. And I think that Ed Norton and Brad Pitt play off of each other really well throughout. I think they have good chemistry. So yeah, 3 out of 5.
Yeah. I'm hesitant to be too direct here because I feel like this episode is destined to be, if not a tentpole, then an optimal entryway for potential friend listeners of the podcast, because we look at our roster of things, and well, I think it's safe to say that more people have seen this than something like On the Count of Three or Nosferatu or something. So for that reason, I want to be as kind as possible here. And I don't want to denigrate people's tastes. The first time I watched this was February of last year, so pretty recently. And I rewatched it again today, before this recording. And the first time I had fun with it, and I was sort of frustrated with whatever the angle of commentary was supposed to be. I don't think I totally got what Zach is expressing now in terms of the self-awareness of the script and the direction. This second time, I think I grasped the sort of thematic self-awareness more, but found it massively less entertaining. And like Zach said, it makes for a good rewatch, but I think maybe more space than a year or less. I think I recalled it a little too well, and at 2 hours 20 minutes, it was kind of a drain there. And we're gonna get into spoilers here, I'm sure. So there's a twist here. So spoiler warning. The first time, the twist totally fooled me. Did not see it coming. The second time, as I think is standard when you're rewatching something like The Sixth Sense or this, when you know the twist, you're maybe looking for clues to see how well that build up holds up, or whether scenes are structured logically around it. And that's done really, really well with respect to Helena Bonham Carter's character, but it's not always seamless with the others, and that did bother me a little bit. It's more of a quibble. I'm really picking nits here, but just something to notice. It's fun. It's, I understand why it's sort of like a movie everyone should watch, and it definitely feels like the type of thing that's better to watch in a group than on your own. For the social aspect of it. But I landed on a 3 out of 5 too. It's just really not my favorite thing, and I'm sure we'll delve into the style a bit more here, but I think it bears a lot of unfortunate hallmarks of 90s films in a really occasionally garish and noticeable way. So 3 out of 5, mostly deserving of its reputation, but not too much for me, I guess.
I think I got Zach's self-awareness point and Christian's 90s slickness point. I think those are like the two things that really stood out to me the whole time. I went into this knowing nothing, basically. Surprisingly, I've avoided everything. I don't know anything about anything. Everyone's like, no, you got to watch it. Maybe it's like an ironic thing where people are watching it and they're like, we're not going to talk about the movie. I bet it is. Psychologists,
it might be.
Probably,
psychologists listening, you have to tell me if that's a subconscious plot. But anyway, David Fincher was not in my mind until this. And I think I was... First of all, I didn't even know there's a twist. Like, that's how much I didn't know. So
wow.
I was assuming from the get-go that a lot of what he was doing was unreliable, and maybe I just have too much oversaturation with unreliable narrators and films of that nature that have probably been partially, if not fully, inspired by Fight Club's cult success, as of like the past 20 years probably. And I think I was not aware that there was any other perspective. I could not look at this and not see the satire. I saw the satire the entire time. I was entirely enthralled by it. I thought it was a really cool, idea, and I think I agree with what Zach said in his review. I was thinking the exact same thing about the first act. I was like, this is starting to garner some very interesting concepts, and it kind of does fit the 90s era, but it is applicable to other things. And then you kind of get to the second and especially the third act, and that's when the style for me really takes over and kind of tanks a lot of the value that could have been. And I have no idea what's in the book or the contents of the book or anything, but going based off of what I saw, I was not aware that there was like supposed to be a twist. I was assuming that it was kind of a figment of his imagination. I didn't know to what extent or to how far they're going to take it. So I was surprised by how much they're like, he was going back and forth on the plane and experiencing the twist. I was surprised at how long it was, but I was generally under the impression that a lot of what was happening was not going to be true. And also, I'm coming hot off the heels of seeing The Matrix for the first time, like maybe a couple months ago. And there's a lot of the same. First of all, the style obviously was very similar.
Green, yeah.
But green, and like the grungy slickness and the CGI and everything. And I was already under that like thematic umbrella in my head. I was already thinking like against the white collars, man. This is like how things are, and then like the strumming and and depression and like embracing your emo-ness. And I was just like, this is I already like I was thinking there's an emo undertone, but now it's like the whole movie's emo now, and it didn't have to be that way. And that was my biggest problem with the film. I thought the performances were great. I thought a lot of the slickness, especially early on, really lent to the film's like unique way of showing how unreliable he is and how many issues he has, and I guess it just became less and less relatable as the film went on. It really wears down on you a lot. Like Christian said, I think probably the biggest thing was that constant like jumping around and slickness, and even if the script is good, I just think I don't know, it kind of just overtook like a lot of the thematic elements that were brewing kind of just got thrown to the wayside for the sake of the twist, and I didn't really enjoy that aspect, especially the ending. But I guess really I wanted to go right into the twist as the first thing. First of all, like how early did you recognize it, and like how much of the twist do you think is a part of the film's success? Like how much of it is what makes it a cult classic, or do you think it really is just like the dude broness and like the funny like Brad Pitt moments and the fighting and everything?
I think the twist is a lot of what makes the movie memorable. I think even for people who might not, quote unquote, get the movie, which sounds like such a pretentious thing to say, but even if there are people who like don't necessarily cotton onto the satire of the film, I think even they think like the twist is cool, and they were like surprised by the twist, and I think that might be a big part of what draws a lot of people to this film. I think it's pulled off pretty well. I will say, being into film, I knew about the twist well before I had seen the movie. So I don't really think I can speak to the twist from the perspective of not knowing about it going in, just because I had seen it broken down in like video essays and classes and textbooks way before I'd even seen the movie, just because that's the exposure of Fight Club. It's one of these movies that everybody talks about. I think it's hinted at pretty well beforehand, though. And I do think there's, speaking to kind of like the style of the movie and the style of Fincher's direction, there's a lot of neat little touches, I think, visually that help to not only hint at that twist, but also lend it greater depth, I think. So early on, there's a couple of different moments where Tyler will show up in a scene for a single frame, kind of in reference to when he splices nudity into children's films later in the film. They do a similar thing to that in the beginning of the film, where he's in like a single frame in like the office or on the street. And I think that kind of is like the establishment of kind of like that identity sort of bubbling up, and it's not quite there yet. He hasn't sort of met Tyler yet, but Tyler is kind of there under the surface. Something that I really liked later, once Tyler is a character, I don't think the twist hasn't happened yet at that point. later in the film, I think it's when the narrator is putting Marla on a bus. There's a movie theater in the background of one scene, and the theater is playing 7 Years in Tibet, which is a Brad Pitt movie. So the implication of the film seems to be that even within the film itself, Tyler looks like Brad Pitt, because that's the narrator's idea of like what a cool, perfect guy looks like. And I think that's really clever. So I do think the movie has things like that, where even once you've kind of seen the twist, it keeps adding little details that you can kind of notice to make it more interesting, or add like a new level to the twist later. And I also just think the performances really make it work. Early on, Norton and Brad Pitt's character, or Brad Pitt, are so different. They're so diametrically opposed that I don't think, knowing nothing about the movie, if you went in a total blank, I don't think you would ever suspect that these two knew each other or were the same guy, just because they feel so different from each other. And then as the movie develops, you kind of see Norton's character develop as well, to the point where when the twist is revealed, it kind of does feel appropriate, and it does feel convincing in a way that if someone had told you that at the beginning of the movie, you'd go, really? So I mean, I think it's built up too well. I think it's executed well. I only wish I could have actually experienced it for the first time at some point as an actual twist, instead of an academic thing I already knew about.
Yeah. Well, I had no idea somehow going into it, at least the first time. Again, this is my second time seeing it. But I was impressed by it. I think viewing it a second time, I think they maybe dwell on the reveal like a little longer than they need to. But for somebody that's seeing it for the first time, that's really knocked out by it, maybe that's more warranted. I think the way they go about misleading the audience is clever without being cheap, like the ways in which the narrator interacts with Tyler. The way that's realized is clever, like the phone call being the sort of first initiation of that relationship. I think is clever, and the whole thing where whenever Marla is in the room, Tyler isn't, for in the house, to sort of maintain that like love triangle that's really a love straight line. And, yeah, I don't know. I think it's really strong. I think it maybe the second time I was a little more annoyed by like the fighting at the end, and then at the very end when he like shoots himself and that kills Tyler but not him. That was just kind of like, oh, okay, fine, I guess. The whole ending, I guess we'll get into the ending. The ending is such a shrug for me, and not even like in an overwhelmingly negative way, but I do think it's true that being like the last part of a movie you experience, endings tend to have a very large bearing over how you rate something as a whole. So maybe that's also why I'm not praising it more. But no, the twist is great, and the performers really are outstanding. And you know, we've talked about how like the class-based discussion or the thematic work at play here has been misinterpreted by some, but I still think they're you know, nuggets of truth in what Tyler Durden says on a philosophical level, like we are what we consume, and what you own, you are owned by what you own rather than the other way around. Like I still think there's value in those sentiments, and it's not all just like edgy Sigma talk. I do think some of it is legitimate for sure. So I don't want to. Don't get me wrong. This is still a solid script.
Okay, Andrew Tate.
Oh boy.
That's another, by the way, very subtle for me personally, a subtle reason why I was taking this as satire, because I like to tell myself that Andrew Tate is satire and not believe that he's a real person. So
I don't know, man.
Yeah, so I kind of already discussed my experience with the twist, but I think it was a a well done twist. Honestly, like I don't usually laugh to myself very much when I'm by myself, to be honest, because then I think I'm ridiculous that I'm laughing to myself, and I stop because I take myself too seriously when I'm trying to laugh. And I literally laughed when I saw the flash because it reminded me of like YouTuber like Fortnite V-Buck giveaways where they like flash a QR code or a code on the screen for like half a second. And okay, see, I can't do it. It's too funny. And I was just like, does that mean he's not supposed to be real? That was like literally my first thought was like, is he not supposed to be a real person? Is that, and then he's going to show up later or something? And then I just like threw it away later. I was like, okay. There were parts of me that were like, maybe he is a real person. Maybe like this is a real thing, or like there's parts of this that he's making up, or maybe Tyler's a real person. But at the end of the day, if you had a gun in my mouth, I would say that that Tyler was not a real person, and I was glad that I was correct in that assumption. But does that mean it was a bad twist? No, I think it was executed good. I think a lot of that, like the flying around and then having a little bit of trouble but not too much trouble, like I feel like what would have really dragged out the twist is if he was going on this thing of self-discovery and it was very linear, like he was for a fact discovering what he had known and what he hadn't. And it also could have gone the other way where it was too non-linear and it was too sporadic and he's trying to like just make up things in his head and there's a lot of like short-term, is this real or is this not, goes too far. It's possible that it leaned too much into that for me, but for the most part I thought of him like going and realizing like how far it actually went and whether or not the bombs were actually real, I felt like was very well executed in him fighting himself. I will agree with Christian. I think that him fighting himself and the cameras went a little bit too far. I think that was a little too on the nose. I think they showing it once maybe would have been good enough for me. That's getting a little nitpicky though. But yeah, I think it's a cool twist overall. I really just don't like the execution. Like the thing that when Zach had mentioned the tidbits and like these things written on paper sound awesome. Like the splicing the film and everything, and even that last frame of the penis is like very, I think that's very cool. I think it adds some artistic value and some depth to, the extent of how, these like the themes are trying to convey with him being so, idolizing this like toxic masculine male. But I just think they're like a tad bit too gimmicky, and I think just having that glossy 90s finish on it made it even more like gimmicky to me. And then the final shot I think is just like the pinnacle of it. I'm like, okay, this is like, I just what is that film? It's like the end of the world or something, and the whole, it's like a guy and his daughter or something just watching, and then the whole world just blows up. I don't know what it is. I forget what film that was, but I keep remembering that scene for some reason because I'm just like, well, that's it. The world's over.
Oh, okay.
Oh well. But that's just, and then the strumming and everything. But you can't tell me that all of that is on the note. Not. I mean, all of that was calculated. Okay, not all of that was calculated. That was 100%. Like, there has to be some seriousness taken into account. Okay, not the whole movie can be satire, Zach. Okay. What rebuttal?
So
what?
The way that I kind of look at the movie is I think that the movie is kind of meant to feel as if it was made by Tyler Durden, as kind of like, this is my story, even though it feels like it was edited by Tyler Durden almost. And so the movie is kind of designed to a certain extent to promote Tyler's worldview and his this being like the fictional character Tyler, even though Tyler and the narrator are technically the same person. But it seems the movie almost seems like it's meant to be part of Project Mayhem and like a recruitment tool for Project Mayhem. And I think that's kind of part of the satire, because a lot of during these monologues that Tyler has, I think frequently he kind of resembles like a cult leader, where, as Christian pointed out, he's throwing out things that make sense, and then he'll throw out something immediately afterward that's like really hypocritical, and doesn't make a lot of sense, and he's deliberately kind of flip-flopping with his essentially cult members to kind of keep them under his sway. But the way that the movie presents that and films it with Brad Pitt as this muscular, manly man in the low lighting of the basement is also designed to kind of like make you ignore that and kind of fall under his sway as well. I don't think the film agrees with Tyler's viewpoint, but I do think that it's trying to kind of construct itself in a way that sells that, so that by the end you're like, oh, shoot, I too have been Fight Clubbed. I too have drank the Kool-Aid. Isn't that frightening? And I think that's where the satire comes across, is in like the edit and the presentation. I'm not going to say that like everything in the movie is performed with like a wink, because I do think this is.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's not like a troll movie. This isn't like Freddy Got Fingered or anything. Like, I do think it is a story and a plot that holds together in and of itself. But
yeah, I guess there's a thing about like 90s escapism when it comes to like mentally escaping situations. Like, that some people may think that trying to escape the white collar situation is to blow it up, right? And there's like only two there. It's a false dichotomy. Like, there's only two ways of going around it. It's either you reject that lifestyle or you are a part of it. It's kind of it really does sound a lot like the Matrix with the blue pill and the red pill. But I think how it works for the Matrix, at least, is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's a different circumstances, and it's relying a lot more on like the assumption of technological innovation and stuff like that, and there's extra themes in there that change the direction. I think in this, presenting that false dichotomy and saying, well, there's another way of thinking. Like, you don't have to just think like Tyler, and you don't just have to think like the corporate executives. You can think another way, but that doesn't really go anywhere. Like, I just feel like I'm rejecting everything. And I feel like that's such a 90s trope. That's like, just reject it all. It doesn't matter anymore. We're going to hold hands and watch the buildings explode is like the ultimate message that I got. And I understand. It's like, well, I mean, neither of them are right. There is a way of going about it, but I don't need to. I know that I can decipher that on my own. But like, the film ends up kind of weakening its own message in that way, where it's like, well, if I have to, do I have to follow Tyler, or like, you get forced in a corner, in my opinion. And but
I do agree. I don't really love the ending. And I think the ultimate message is, like you were saying, Mitchell, that the idea is you kind of find your own way, and that doesn't have to be like a method that's like presented to you by somebody else. But I think the ending could present that moral in a better way, because it really does get to a point where it's like, all right, plot's over, goodbye. But in a lot of ways, I feel like the plot isn't totally over. Like, all of the Project Mayhem members are still right downstairs, and they still think that he's Tyler, and they just blew up 7 huge buildings. Who's going to be seen as responsible for that? It feels like the ending does have a lot of unanswered questions that I don't necessarily need answers to those questions, but like a little something that at least tells me like, all right, well, what does Ed Norton's character do right after this? Like, even if I just knew what he did in the following days, and that gave us something to like interpret that kind of third meaning from, I think I would like that a little bit more than the buildings explode to the Pixies' Where Is My Mind and the credits roll over a penis. That's
yes,
it does feel like a very quick ending to me.
Yeah. Now that we're digging into the ending, I'll just say I agree.
Wow.
Especially with the needle drop is really egregious, and I think I keep throwing around like this like 90s garish label without explicitly stating what that is, and it's both the soundtrack and the score. I didn't take note of the score a lot, but it felt like it echoed the soundtrack and not in a great way to me. That just again, it dates it in a way. And when I say garish 90s effects, I mean like the the all computer animated shots where it's like if you shrunk a drone shot to like the size of Ant-Man and like went inside the waste paper basket. I was just like, ooh, this looks really bad. And they thought it, I'm sure they thought it looked like the coolest thing ever while they were making the film, but it's aged quite poorly.
So we can go into that now, by the way, the effects and the cinematography too.
Because I wanted to speak to that, because I think that the in-person cinematography by Jeff Cronenweth, who is the son of David Cronenweth, who shot Blade Runner, I think the in-person cinematography I like quite a bit. It is very 90s, and it is very early David Fincher. This has a lot in common, I think, with the look of Seven, where everything just looks gross. And I think it works a little bit better in Seven than it does in this movie, but I do still like the look of it. But in terms of David Fincher has always been a director who's very keen on embracing the newest thing and seeing what the newest thing can do to creatively advance the medium. And I think that usually he does make big, creative, admirable swings with the newest thing. So he's always been right on the forefront of digital cinematography. He's always been right on the forefront of, okay, how do I incorporate CGI into my live action film? I think he's gotten better over time, though, at estimating just how much the newest thing can actually do. Because this movie and Panic Room, I think I like Panic Room a little better than this, actually, which up till now, Panic Room was like my second least favorite Fincher movie after Alien 3. But he seems to have, like, he's gone, with CG, I can put the camera anywhere. And so there's like these long, drawn-out shots of, like, and the camera goes behind the fridge and inside the fridge in Panic Room. There's a long scene where the camera has to move from upstairs to the front door of a house, and it goes through the kitchen, and for no reason at all, it like goes around the kitchen island 3 times and goes through the handle of a coffee pot. Where things like that, where it feels like we can do this now, isn't it cool? But it's not really serving the story all that well. And I feel like he's gotten a lot better with that as he's moved on, where like now Fincher like shoots like barely any camera movement on set. He just shoots everything in like 12K and then does everything, all the movement digitally in post. And I think checking out something like Zodiac or even Gone Girl, I think you see a David Fincher who's a lot more or a lot less feverishly excited about what he can do, and has kind of developed like the maturity and the tact to say, okay, David, we can, but should we? And I think his films are a little bit better for it as you move forward.
Yeah. And you mentioned that he shot this in 12K?
No, his like later films are that way. This was shot on film, I think, so.
Yeah.
Like,
well, in any case, I don't know a lot about the difference in resolution between film stock or digital, but this is really overdue for a remaster or some sort of digital new coat of paint, because it's just I mean, it's not, there's no 4K release for this yet, digitally or physically.
Wow.
And yeah, I know, I was shocked.
Yeah,
I looked for it, and yeah, I rented this in I guess HD on Amazon, but it looks really icky, and you know, streaming this does the already green sheen no favors. It's just like that sort of intentional grossness is compounded to an extent that I would guess the filmmakers would prefer is not the case. I don't have a ton of familiarity with Fincher as a director. The only ones I've seen are the ones Mitchell mentioned. So this, Gone Girl, and Alien Cubed.
Yes. Alien Cubed.
I loved Gone Girl. Thought that was awesome, and sort of been meh about the other two. I don't know why that is. I didn't feel like I took note of the cinematography too much in this one. I feel like the fights were pretty well staged, and that's obviously important. Those need to be convincing and gross, and you know, credit there for sure. But beyond that, yeah, he's clearly a good director. Looking at his CV, I still haven't seen Zodiac or Seven, so I really need to get on those. But
Zodiac's great.
Yeah,
I really
on my
recommend Zodiac. That's
Well, Fincher wanted Jordan Cronenweth, but he got Parkinson's. So then he hired his son.
oh
yes.
my god.
So that's what happened.
Yeah.
And yeah, and Seven and The Game were the inspirations, and he used the Super 35 format.
Okay. Yeah.
Like that. Zach knew all that in his film school brain.
Well, I know what those things are, but you know.
I understand. I understand what 35 millimeter means. And you know what? I think for the fact that most of the film was at night, I think was an accomplishment.
Yeah.
You know, I recognize that, and I think there's enough diverse sources of lighting where there's a lot more grossness and shadowiness when bad things were happening, and like things were generally a lot brighter when he was like thinking normally, I think, or it's more like yeah, and I think what am I thinking? What did I say? What was I gonna say, Zach?
I really don't know what you were gonna say.
Okay. The scenes with Tyler's friend Brad Pitt. I think having, like you had mentioned, Zach, having those significantly opposing personalities and having that reflected very prominently by the fact that they have wide shots and that their entire outfits were seen a lot.
Yeah.
Even if they're naked, and I think that was interesting. And I think nothing really stuck out to me in the decrepit house, but I think the fight scenes were, I agree with Christian, I think they're pretty well choreographed. Apparently they're heavily choreographed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that having more of them in short, having like short multiple fights is a lot better than having like long ones, because I don't think there would have been space for a long fight, or if there ever would have been a point to have one that served the story, unless you count the one at the end, obviously, in the parking garage. But yeah, I think I liked the fights. I liked the overdoing it with the blood. I thought was actually pretty effective, and I think having those mundane environments mixed with the splashes of red and Jared Leto's face getting pounded was very exciting. Yeah, that's pretty much so going on the CGI. I pretty much agree. I think I agree with both of you. And I think the CGI is definitely aged, but I think towards the end Fincher decided to stop using it as much, and I think it worked. It worked to set the mood to an extent. I think it worked to set the chaos of Edward Norton's brain.
Yes.
After seeing his babysitter act at Toby's dinner theater as a child, and that's what inspired him that's what inspired him. So
really,
fun fact, yes.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So I think it's stupid. The CGI is stupid, but it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I thought it lent to the dark humor most of all. I think. I think already me laughing at very dark, stupid things. I thought it was funny to just have that stuff in there, and I don't know. If you're gonna go 90s, you might as well go all the way, I guess. Pretty much.
Yeah.
What else? We could talk about the soundtrack. So
sure.
What key was the guitar in, or tuning at the end,
bro,
Christian?
My guess would be drop D or E flat because it was pop punk, but I got no idea.
Yeah. I figured, since I think the soundtrack, honestly, for the score, I should say, the score really picked up for me when Tyler was fighting the imaginary guy. When they start and having that very subtle, like, I don't know, a snare drum or something in the background, and having like that brushing sound and like the subtle strumming and stuff. I thought that was setting the mood, and I thought that was used pretty good. I think other than that, I think everything else was either, I mean, like, yeah, I guess the songs are okay. I don't know. I'll listen to your opinions first.
Well, Similar to when we talked about the score to Black Hawk Down, I don't really remember a lot of the score, honestly, but there's like one key riff, or like I guess we'll call it a segment that gets repeated every now and then, that sounds a little bit like Smack My Bitch Up. It plays during the opening title sequence.
Sounds like what?
Oh, have you never heard Smack My Bitch Up? I think it's by Nine Inch Nails. It's a good song. But it's kind of like techno riff that plays during the opening titles. And it might be really 90s. I enjoy it quite a bit. I think it works for what the movie is. And I think that ultimately we can't go into every movie with the expectation that it be timeless. I don't really even hate the "Where Is My Mind" needle drop. I know it's become a cliche in the subsequent years, but upon this film's release, I feel like that would not have been the cliche that it's become now, where like every film that has some kind of a split personality in the plot that shows up in the trailer, over the credits, or somewhere in the actual film. For what this is, and as old as it is now, because this movie is almost 30 years old, I'm okay with it being there. So yeah, it didn't make a ton of impressions on me, but what I do remember of the score and soundtrack, I'm fine with.
Yeah, I don't remember it too specifically either. I think what worked best for me was during the sort of intro, I guess, first act, when we're getting a lot of Edward Norton voiceover, and he's going to these support groups for people that are suffering from maladies that he's not suffering himself. The way that it's sort of, I completely do not remember what the sounds are, but I just remember it making sense in context as Meatloaf hugs him and he just stands there. So
Yeah.
I guess points there. And Zach, you were mentioning this is jumping a ways back, but how Brad Pitt like says something and then contradicts it. I think my favorite bit of that is when they're on the bus and narrator Edward Norton points out the advertisement or for the underwear models or whatever, and they're like these perfectly toned guys with a six-pack or whatever, and then Brad Pitt's like, self-improvement is masturbation, but self-destruction is that's the cat's pajamas, or however he finishes the thought. And then like one or two scenes later, he's shirtless and he looks exactly like the underwear model, and that's just like that is a very solid choice and obvious visual choice, given that that's revealed sequentially there. So props for that.
Yeah, I think I've determined that the music didn't bother me as much, but I think yeah, I don't know. We'll get into weekly review. I'll be talking about a different decade.
Oh, okay.
And my problems with that. So I'll set the end of that point as a teaser.
All
right. We'll put a pin in it.
Yep, putting a pin in it.
Okay.
So that's all I have. If you guys have any other final thoughts, go ahead.
Well, I'll say it's always fun to see Jared Leto get pummeled in the face. So there's that. And we haven't talked about Helena Bonham Carter a lot, and I guess, looking back, her character isn't given critically much to do. I mean, she's at the beginning, she's doing the same thing that Norton is doing, and then she's kind of, for better or for worse, just sort of a
she does
romantic
a lot
subplot. Yeah, I mean, but I think she's a terrific performer here. And I think it's legitimately funny when narrator Norton just hears Brad Pitt and her just like screaming around the house. And like these like cartoonish portrayals of sex, and both times when watching this film, I've been like, I should turn the volume down for these because people will think this is something it's not. No, I fully think that she stands up to Norton and Pitt in terms of quality, which is commendable. So, and I've complained a lot about this, but it's definitely a good film. I can see why it has the reputation it does, and at the least it's entertaining, and sometimes you're just not going to be able to communicate your message to everyone, and that's not always the fault of the artist anyway. So,
yeah, I mean, okay, we can clown on Jared Leto. I do think he's honestly not that bad in this. I think this is from a time when Jared Leto was an actual performer instead of a guy who had convinced himself he was Tyler Durden. And I like that when he gets beaten up, he stays like legitimately beaten up. Like that guy's face is ruined. And I like that they stick to that, because sometimes in these movies, a pretty boy actor gets beaten up and they're like, oh, I have a black eye, I'm hideous. And it's clear that he's just fine. We never mentioned Meatloaf. I might just have an affinity for Meatloaf because I like his music, and I like actual meatloaf. But I don't think it's much of an overstatement to say that he's kind of the heart of the movie.
Oh, wow.
I find Bob like the most sympathetic person in this entire film. He's this poor, broken man who gets dragged from place to place in desperate need of like something to believe in, and he gets nothing for it but shot in the head. By the end of the movie, the person I feel most bad for is Bob, and I feel like a large part of that is Meatloaf's very sympathetic performance. I don't want to like take over the episode, but while we were discussing this, it occurred to me that a film we discussed earlier this season, Angel Heart, and this film kind of have very similar twists. So I was curious, if you don't mind me asking, Mitchell, which of the films you guys felt kind of pulled off their twist better?
I didn't ask for you to be the conductor of this train.
I can edit this bit out if you don't want us to go down this road. It was just something I was curious of.
No, that's
just gonna grab my eraser.
It's a great point, Zach. It's a great point. It's a great point, Christian. Settle down. Put that back where it came from, or so help me. Well, I think it worked a lot better in Angel Heart.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
I think
interesting.
There's a lot more subtlety and calculated cinematography when it came to like practical placement of props were kind of a big thing because of the objects, like the gun and the what's it called? Now I'm blanking on the movie. My point just got broken. The important objects in the movie, the like subtle gestures and the lines felt very, I don't know. It just everything in general is more subtle, down already down to the script. And even though I had kind of seen the twists going in a little bit, I mean, there's multiple twists going on, and there's multiple impressions you've got of characters that were entirely wrong. And I felt like the sense of control that you got from the direction came across by the fact that everything that happened to the narrator was unreliable in some facet. In this movie, it's a lot more linear, in my opinion. I think it's either like, did he believe, is this real or is this not? In that one, it's more about like characters literally being possessed and like, there's just the religious guys to it, and there's like the fact that Satan is there as an influence. So it's like there's a lot of like character influences, and there's different. It just feels a lot more multifaceted to me, and there's a lot more to discuss there. I feel like in this, it's either like you got the twist or you didn't.
Okay.
I don't know. I think I probably prefer the Fight Club twist, but I also think that. I think that the Fight Club twist is harder because there's two of them, whereas in Angel Heart, it's like he's chasing his own shadow in a sense. Okay. So I think cinematically it's just easier to visualize that than what they do with Norton and Pitt. And I also just feel like I vaguely predicted the Mickey Rourke thing, and it kind of didn't feel like there was anywhere else to go but there with Angel Heart, which I didn't necessarily feel like was the case with Fight Club. Like they could have been two separate characters and it could have ended differently, feasibly. Whereas there wasn't any real candidate other than him to have been doing all of the things.
Yeah. I think I like Angel Heart more as a movie. But I will agree that I think the twist in Fight Club is a little better incorporated into the actual movie. The twist in Fight Club feels like more of a vital, like skeletal element to the movie. Like you need that there, and you need that hinted at throughout the movie and built up throughout the movie for the end to have any kind of payoff. Whereas in Angel Heart, it does kind of feel like surprise, and then it just kind of ends. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's the backbone of the movie in the way that it does in Fight Club. So yeah, that was just, it occurred to me on a whim, so I thought I'd mention it. But yeah.
Agree to disagree.
Okay.
Angel Heart is objectively better. Yeah, maybe I also just prefer the direction of that movie better, but not in like a sense of like comparatively, but like just the style. The style, Zach.
Hey,
made me rely on the style again.
I'm down with the style.
Down with the style, man. Yeah, I mean, it's Fight Club. Come on, guys. Come on. Come on. Come on, the soap. The soap. Yeah, you should see it. Sorry, we spoiled it for you. If you haven't seen it, goober. You had like 24 years, so.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's a long time.
Yeah, but 3 out of 5 from us. We're like the dissenting opinion. So we're going to have the cloves. Yeah. The cloves. You want some cloves in your food? The enclaves of Fight Club members coming after us. So
I'm scared.
With that note, we have to go to Week in Review.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm weak regarding this view.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do a first for this season, and I'm gonna talk about a book on the Week in Review.
What? You don't read.
The weird thing is I read a lot. It's just I don't think I've ever discussed a book on Week in Review. But this morning I had a long flight back from Texas. I was on a family vacation, and so I brought along a book, and I read a little horror paperback called Gwen in Green by an author named Hugh Zachary. This is a part of a series called Paperbacks from Hell, which are new reprints of long out-of-print like paperback horror novels from the 60s, 70s, 80s that maybe had like one run. They were sold primarily in like gas stations and airports, and then they were never printed again because a lot of people either didn't buy them or considered them crap. And a lot of these, I'm going to be totally frank, I bought them for the shelf appeal because they have beautiful covers. But I'm going to read them anyway because I don't like owning books that I haven't read. And Gwen in Green really worked for me for like the first 2 acts. The basic premise is that a woman and her husband move onto this this plot of land on a little island in New Jersey. And they're developing the land, and just across from them, there's like a power company that's building a new canal, and they're doing a lot of damage to the area. And throughout the first 2 acts of the movie, nothing's ever like set in stone in terms of what's happening, but you get this general impression that the area is like communicating with Gwen and sort of changing her somehow, because most of the book is told from kind of like a vague perspective. It is a third person, but the implication is that you're kind of seeing things from her perspective. And at the beginning of the book, she's this sort of prudish woman who's like terrified of even the idea of sex. And she's, as throughout the book, as sort of the area starts to communicate with her and almost like reach out to her in pain as the canal is developed, she develops this very strange relationship with her husband and her therapist in town, but it's mostly kept vague. And then in the last act, Hugh Zachary goes, "Oh, this is what's been happening the whole time," and the twist is like the laziest thing you could do. It turns everything that was subtext into overt text, and I would argue makes it kind of dumb. And it's a shame because I really liked the first 2 acts, and I was pretty shocked by the actual ending, but the reveal of the motivation behind everything that's going on is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull level bad. Pretty directly Kingdom of the Crystal Skull level bad as well.
All right.
I'm gonna keep it vague there. So yeah, unfortunately, I think I'm gonna have to give Gwen in Green a 2 out of 5. It's only like 187 pages, so if you do want to pick it up and give it a read, it's brief. If it's at like your local library or your local newsagents and you have a long train ride, I don't think it's a book you should avoid. But I don't think that I can call it an especially good book because, yeah, the twist is a big letdown. 2 out of 5 for Gwen in Green.
And it was written by huge Zachary. Go figure, man.
I guess so.
Well, I think for my week in review segment, I'm going to do something a little different. A retroactive plug of sorts.
Aha.
We've been on a little bit of a recording hiatus of sorts because we've had miscellaneous out of town things, each of us. I have been in I'm gonna dox myself again. I've been in Northeast Ohio for most of July, rehearsing for the Cleveland Orchestra's live score performance of Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. I'm joining that chorus this fall and moving to the area for reasons. So exciting times.
Yes.
And before then, I'd started kind of dipping my toe into the whole live score performance thing. I saw West Side Story performed by the Cleveland Orchestra at Severance a few months ago. And more recently, my family was in Chicago, and we saw the Chicago Symphony do The Force Awakens, which was also really neat. And I would just say, before I even talk about The Two Towers, this is in my opinion, one of the best ways to see a film because you just hear everything a little bit more. And, you know, not every film is suitable to this setting, but when the score is present and obviously of like a grand thematic nature, like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings is, it really comes alive, and it's a great moment for fans. So I will say it was really annoying in Chicago. People kept applauding like when things happened, like over big musical cues, and it's just like, stop! Aren't you?
I'm trying to sing.
Yeah, aren't you here to listen to the music? Like, gosh,
Stop congratulating me.
Yes.
But I basically, on top of performing the Lord of the Rings, a total of 4 times, The Two Towers, I also watched the theatrical version and the extended version while rehearsing and performing this, because after seeing the theatrical version, I was bothered by how much less I liked it compared to the extended, which was the only version I had seen. And I had also rewatched the theatrical version of Fellowship before all of this, and I will say for Fellowship, the theatrical version is probably arguably better. It's, to me, pretty obvious in the extended what's supplementary material. There's a lot of extra stuff with Galadriel and Lorien that doesn't need to be there in the extended. But with The Two Towers, I feel like a lot of meat is cut off the bones that is really important. Faramir, there's this flashback sequence with Boromir and Denethor that's in the extended edition, and it's not in the theatrical of Two Towers.
Oh yeah,
and
okay.
I think Faramir is just a really flat character in the theatrical version of Two Towers, and that gets fleshed out more in Return of the King. But at least in the theatrical version, there's this attempt to link Faramir and Gondor and Frodo and all of that to the Rohan Helm's Deep thing, and sort of render them equal, but they never feel equal in the theatrical version, and that's bothersome. And there's also this sort of implied romantic interest between Éowyn and Aragorn in the theatrical version, but she never even feels like remotely a threat to Arwen in the theatrical version versus the extended, where there are much more interactions between the two of them. And yeah, I would just argue that in this case, at least, the supplements are necessary for that story to be delivered fully. But I love The Two Towers. It's my favorite of the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Oh.
And yeah, I know, hot take.
Yeah.
But I think it's because I find Saruman much more tangible than Sauron. I mean, Sauron's just like this eye in the sky, whereas Saruman is like this, supposed to be the best of them, this wizard that is corrupted and given in because he's decided their defeat is inevitable. I think that's really interesting. And I think the way the group splits up here is interesting. I think Gimli is top tier comedy. I think Smeagol is unbelievably funny, and I can't say enough about what Andy Serkis does in this role. I really think he deserved an award and still does. And in terms of like advancements in cinema, when you think about the fact that this guy performed everything physically and vocally with like dots on his face, just the extent to which it is convincing is truly remarkable, and I can't imagine how this trilogy would have worked without him. So 5 out of 5, even though the theatrical version made me love it a little less, and I definitely need a break from it after singing it 4 times. But if you're ever in the Cleveland area, I know we're doing Amadeus this September, assuming this episode is published soon enough before then. God knows. If not, I'm sure it was great.
It was a great time. Yay.
Have you seen Amadeus
go
before?
See a live score. I saw the director's cut of Amadeus, and I loved it. Yeah.
I might have to get out for that. That's Amadeus is great. I can't imagine seeing that live.
Yeah.
And Christian singing with it. That'd be cool. That'd be pretty cool. You know what else is cool? You know what's cooler than the Cleveland Orchestra?
Not many things.
Iron Butterfly. The Reds. Red 7. The Prime Movers. These
I'm a
are
little lost
clearly
here.
these are the greatest musical artists of all time.
Oh, I see.
Uh-huh.
You understand? And that's why they're in Manhunter. Manhunter is an adaptation of Red Dragon, the book.
Mm-hmm.
It was okay. It was okay. There were some pretty good moments, but it was okay. And I'm a huge fan of the show Hannibal, and I was such a fan that I stopped watching it for some reason. And I don't know why. And I stopped watching it right when the Red Dragon events happened. Okay. And apparently the Red Dragon events are like a pseudo prequel to Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. Zach can confirm. And yeah, honestly, I think the acting is awesome. Okay. Peterson and Noonan are great. I think they're both convincing. And honestly, I can't see anybody else other than Anthony Hopkins and Mads Mikkelsen as freaking Hannibal at this point. Maybe that's my fault. So, but yeah, I think the way I clearly see where the show got inspiration, and I think letting Hannibal take a back seat really lent a lot of weight to Noonan's performance. And I think for the most part, I was very put off by a lot of the aggressive 80s style. And it's obviously because we just came off of Thief, which is also a Michael Mann movie. But in that, it worked a lot better. It worked to serve the plot a lot better. It helped, push the drama a little bit more forward. It helped you be engaged. In this, it was kind of like a meme. It was kind of like a meme, and it was supposed to add to the spontaneity and the awkwardness and the homoerotic undertones and all that with the Red Dragon. And I thought that worked really well to create a villainous character, but they definitely went overboard towards the end. And I think that was probably my biggest criticism. But I liked it. I maybe I have some bias from the show, but I really think that Will Graham was a very compelling character in general, and I'm not sure about adapting it from the book, Zach, but I think that for a movie that Silence of the Lambs is all about Hannibal, right? I mean, it really is, and it really is about Anthony Hopkins' performance that makes it so engaging for most people. But I don't know what else to say. I just got 80s style. It sucked in my brain, and I don't know. The sunset at the end. Zach, explain yourself. Zach, explain yourself.
Okay. Well, I mean, I will agree. I think you gave Manhunter a better rating than I did. I don't really like Manhunter, and I'm kind of 50-50 on Michael Mann projects, where I really love half of them, as 50-50 would suggest, and then like the other half. Michael Mann produced the original Miami Vice TV series, and I don't really like that aesthetic, and some of his projects are very Miami Vice. Like Manhunter feels like if they adapted Red Dragon as like a two-parter on Miami Vice, like the original from the 80s. So it is very neon. It's very synthy. It's very, I'm going to sit on the white sand beaches and stare off into the perfect sunset. And yeah, I think that not a lot of it, or a lot of it doesn't work. I do think Anthony Hopkins is a lot more memorable, I think, as Hannibal. But I think it's interesting to see Brian Cox's take on the character, because in a very flashy movie, he's kind of the only one who sort of feels like a real person, I think. Like, his version of Hannibal feels a lot like, okay, if you went to interview or speak to an actual criminal genius, he might actually act like this. Whereas Anthony Hopkins' version of Hannibal, though a great performance, does kind of feel like a movie monster occasionally. He's scarier in like a cinematic way, but I think actually sitting in a room with Brian Cox Hannibal would be utterly horrifying. At first, you'd be like, "Oh, he looks like my English teacher," and then after just talking to him for a little while, you'd be like, "Oh, is he gonna beat me up?" Even though he's like on the other side of those bars, I feel like he's gonna beat me up.
Yeah. For some reason, Brian Cox didn't do it for me, but I see what you're saying. I think a lot of the subtlety and the little cues and stuff make him a lot more of a believable person. I definitely agree with that. And I think, especially because he lends more to the police procedural first part than he does in the latter craziness, like pursuing part.
Yeah.
And I think like pacing wise, I think that works really well. And I think like Dollarhide, I think he's an awesome secondary to Hannibal villain. And I think that, there's a lot of restraint that could have very easily not been restrained in every aspect except the style, honestly. And I do think that the first half was very like one thing after another. It's just like a regular mystery type thing. But I still recommend it. Definitely anybody who's interested and wants to see more of Hannibal Lecter in a different light, I guess, than, Hopkins. But yeah, so what's the next bit now?
Is it time?
I think it's
What's
time
the next bit?
for the final segment of the Marvelous Cinema Tour.
Yes. The
So I
tour
will
is
point
over.
But I'm
a weird connection to Fight Club. Dollarhide is played by Edward Norton in the Red Dragon movie that they made as a prequel to Silence of the Lambs. But yeah, the final installment in the Marvelous Cinema Tour, unless you're listening to these episodes as they go out, in which case it will be the review of the final movie in the Marvelous Cinema Tour. But in the next few weeks,
what's coming out after this?
you'll get many things. This is only episode 94.
That's so unfortunate.
So yes,
all
I'm
the
discussing
things.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 today, which is the final film that I will be discussing on the Marvelous Cinema Tour. But there might be one or two other films that come out that I discuss after this that we have already recorded, but they're coming out in later episodes. I discussed all this, I think, in the last episode we did a Marvelous Cinema Tour in. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, going into this, weirdly, my expectations weren't that high. I think because despite the fact that Guardians 2 and Guardians 1 are at the top of my MCU rankings, I'm kind of so done with Marvel at this point that it was just a thing on my to-do list. So I went into it, I think, as a true skeptic, and I also didn't expect to be watching this at this point. This trip that I went on to Texas was to visit family, and one day after we went to the beach, we all came home, and my sister, who we were staying with, said, "Let's watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3." And I kind of thought, oh, that wasn't on my calendar until next week, but okay. And so the whole family, my sister, my brother-in-law, my other sister, my mom, and my little 5-year-old nephew, we all sat down to watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And I will say that I think from a purely objective standpoint, it's definitely better than Guardians 1 and Guardians 2. I think it is a stronger movie overall. I think visually, Guardians 2 has a lot of individual shots that are a lot stronger and a lot more striking. Kind of the big aesthetic thing in this one, or the big visual thing in this one, seems to be very CG enhanced long takes. There's lots of moments in this movie where like a whole scene is done in one take as the camera moves around a CG environment, which isn't as much my thing. And I'm always less impressed by a CG enhanced long take than I am by an actual long take, because I get that those are still difficult to pull off because it requires a lot of tactical rendering. But to me, punching in your numbers and your effects the right way so you don't crash your computer is a less impressive feat than, oh wow, they actually got the camera to move like that on set. That being said, it still looks good. And I think the High Evolutionary is a great villain.
Yes.
That was a really good performance, and I kind of read up on some of what James Gunn said about including that character, and he mentioned that he wanted to include a Marvel villain who's just purely despicable and kind of feels like a genuine sort of evil historical figure where just his every decision seems informed by total narcissism and selfishness, and there doesn't seem to be like a pitiable bone in his body. And he was kind of comparing it to, like, I mean, this sounds like a lofty comparison, but when you think of kind of the great monsters of history, you think of an Adolf Hitler. Nobody goes like, you know, with Thanos, you could say, oh, but, you know, from his perspective, his plan, like, made sense and he was trying to do the right thing. When you look at a lot of these sort of historical monsters, you're like, no, that was just kind of an evil guy who was motivated by insanity and narcissism. And I think he captures that well with the High Evolutionary. And I think he builds to it well, because a lot of the animal cruelty by the end makes you feel like, yeah, I want to see this guy's stretchy face get peeled off. I think that'd be fun. But I will say, watching this, I was still aware of the formula. This doesn't feel like every other MCU film, but it does feel like there's a checklist. It does feel like this is a Guardians movie, so we need the soundtrack. In Guardians 1 and Guardians 2, the soundtrack was almost always motivated by characters finding a reason to play that song in the moment. And it always felt natural. It always felt like that song should be there, and it made sense that they would play that in that scene. In this movie, a lot of the time for me, the songs felt like there should be a song here. And so there's a song there, and then there's like a close-up of somebody's iPod playing. And it felt a lot less motivated, and I think didn't complement the movie as much. I also think the characters just didn't gel as much and weren't quite as funny. And I know the point is that the group is meant to kind of be fractured in this movie, and they're meant to be tense and kind of on their last legs. But that really isn't very fun to watch. And I don't think there's quite enough weight here for that to play as legitimate, like, heavy drama for those who aren't really emotionally invested in the characters already. And I'm kind of an outsider at best. So to me, this sort of just played like a Guardians film where they yelled at each other a lot and weren't very funny. And I get why that's the case, but it didn't quite work for me as much. Also, for the movie being about Rocket, it kind of felt like Rocket was barely in it. Now, let me expand my thoughts on that, because that sounds absurd at first. But Rocket, as we know him, is the wisecracking raccoon played by Bradley Cooper. He gets pummeled and into a coma like immediately at the beginning of the movie after saying maybe like 3 lines, and he doesn't wake up until the 3rd act. So most of what we see from Rocket in the middle of this movie is like a young Rocket growing up who feels like a totally different character, because in many respects he is, and he's not had kind of the weight and the experiences put upon him that make him the Rocket that we know. So even though we're kind of seeing the birth of this character, it instead just kind of feels like the character we know and love has been pushed off screen in favor of a puppet show for most of the movie. And I didn't dislike those flashback scenes, but it did end up making the film feel like a story of two very divorced halves to me. And I like stuff in both halves. I love when Rocket attacks the High Evolutionary and turns his face into beef jerky. A lot of the stuff with Teefs and Floor and Lila felt a little... I was like, okay, all right. This is the world's tiniest violin. I know what you're doing. I could kind of see straight through that, but it was semi-effective. You know, I felt some sympathy for the spider rabbit who just wanted to talk.
You better.
Yeah, thank you.
Shut up, Peter.
Even if I could see right through it, I did kind of see what they were doing there. Yeah, so it's a very flawed movie, I think. I don't think that this is a perfect movie by any means. It did come out on the top of my MCU rankings. This does have the top spot because, like I said, I think it is better than Volume 1 or Volume 2, and those are at the top already. But this also, I think, was a good movie to go out on because it really reminded me, okay, these can be good movies, but at this point, I think these are very much not for me. And it's just gotten to a point where there's not much that I can get out of these anymore. Even if I can kind of sit back and go, I can see how this would be fun for somebody. I can't really see how it would be fun for kids, I will say. Yeah. And I don't think that these Marvel movies should be serving kids by any means. But I think a lot of this movie, a kid would probably find quite boring, honestly. Because a lot of it is like discussions between Quill and Gamora over their lost relationship, and a lot of it is very much kind of dramatic character scenes instead of flashy explosions and things like that. And there's some of that, but it's a lot more subdued, I think, weirdly. And I think that's a kind of testament to that, is that my nephew got up like an hour and a half into the movie and actively volunteered to go to bed because he just wasn't interested anymore. And he loves superheroes. He loves the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he would rather hear a story and take a nap, I guess. So yeah, 4 out of 5. I felt like there was something else I wanted to mention, but I can't. Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock felt kind of tacked on to me. Which they built up Adam Warlock and the Sovereign as like the big bad, and then the Sovereign Mother and Adam Warlock are in this movie as like a brief little side thing, and he pops up every now and then to tell the joke. That did feel like a bit of a not really much of a payoff. I did think it was interesting. I'm not going to say I did intensive research on this or anything like that, but as a result of the Marvelous Cinema Tour, every now and then I get recommendations on YouTube for like video essays on comic books. And I watched one relatively recently, which was on Adam Warlock, the character. And apparently one of his like major arcs back when I think he was just called Him originally, and Christian, you might be able to fill in some details on this as well. But apparently his like first arc where he becomes, Adam Warlock in the comics was written by a very Mormon man. So in the comics, he meets the High Evolutionary, who basically is a metaphor for actual God in the comics. And the High Evolutionary says, hey, here's this planet that I tried to make that I'm calling Counter-Earth, but everybody messed up, and this isn't what I wanted it to be. Adam, can you go kill all of them for me? And he's like a superhero, and he goes across this Counter-Earth destroying God's sinners. And that's like the thing, and that's like the good
Textbook
thing that he's
Brigham
doing
Young
in his first major arc. And I kind of like that they totally flipped that on its head in this film. Once again, that's just like one arc. I'm by no means an expert on Adam Warlock, but that kept me interested at least, and I'm glad I saw that video essay beforehand. So yeah, I have nothing to preview. This is the conclusion of the Marvelous Cinema Tour. I've been doing this for 2 seasons.
End of the line.
And you know what? It does kind of feel like the end of an era. It's it's a little weird. This is the last season of Cookie Pocket, in which we're recording it during a summer that directly adjoins to a time when all of us were in college. It's the last season of the Marvelous Cinema Tour. Yeah, it feels odd to kind of close the book, and the season's not done yet. You've got more episodes that are going to come out, more episodes we're recording. But yeah, who knows what tour shall come next? So over the next few weeks, enjoy my thoughts on 2 or 3 other Marvel films I've forgotten. But just know this is where the tour ends.
Zach has the smallest violin, but I have the biggest magnifying glass to see his heart is growing. Just a tiny bit.
They
For a
say
moment,
that the Zach's
he-
heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Yeah. The second Chiefs bit the bullet, there was a little tear that sucked its way back in like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Okay, we're going to run down now. Remember when we were talking about Fight Club like 5 million hours ago?
I'm chasing Gamora.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm doing it.
She doesn't know who you are, Christian. Stop.
Damn.
Helena Bonham Carter might know who Tyler is,
Hey,
but
I'll take it.
okay. Zach can go first. This is run down.
Okay.
Christian gets run over, beaten to a pulp.
Yep.
Oh, jeez.
About and with things from the movie for a minute. Done this a million times now, so yeah, I'm ready. If you're ready, Zach.
Okay.
Start the clocky.
We shall start then in 3, 2, 1, start. Starting the film inside Edward Norton.
3 out of 5.
Bob.
3 out of 5.
Planet Starbucks.
2 out of 5.
Brad Pitt visions.
3 out of 5.
Penguin.
4 out of 5.
Oxygen gets you high.
3 out of 5.
Flying camera.
2 out of 5.
Film school.
3 out of 5.
Rate this your favorite rule of Fight Club.
Ooh. 4 out of 5? I'm not sure.
Fighting William Shatner.
3 out of 5.
Emailing haikus.
3 out of 5.
Condom glass slipper analogy.
2 out of 5.
I'm frickin' Lou. Who the frick are you?
3 out of 5.
Homework assignments.
3 out of 5.
Raymond the veterinarian.
4 out of 5.
Not being my khakis.
3 out of 5.
No longer Morbin time.
4 out of 5.
Near life experience.
3 out of 5.
Robert Paulson.
3 out of 5.
Lead salad.
Oh,
3 out of
time's
5.
up.
We had
Darn.
one
That.
more.
What is
We
the
had
4th rule?
one.
I genuinely don't remember.
I don't remember either.
Ooh, yeah.
The first 2, don't talk about it. Is the 4th one if you tap out, fight's over? Or is that 5 or 6?
There are 6? I thought there were only 5.
I think there's 7.
There's 7.
Oh, there
Yeah.
are 7, aren't there?
Oh.
Well,
We
it
gotta
doesn't
figure
matter.
this
He
out.
could change them
Fourth
every
rule,
time.
Only 2 guys to a fight.
Oh,
That's a good
okay.
one. You chose a good one.
I'm a monogamous fighter, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a very logistical
that-
rule.
Yeah.
With that, now that Christian is all messed up in the face
Oh.
and bleeding all over his work shirt,
Oh.
who is previewing next?
That's me.
It's me.
It's me. Chevroletto. So, yes, we're going this week from Fight Club, arguably the ultimate film bro movie, to next week, arguably another ultimate film bro movie, because next time we're talking about Taxi Driver, directed by Martin Scorsese. This one's a very well-known film. I think it's a very good film. But let's see what we all think of it, and I tune in next time if you want to find out. We're staying in the grimy cities until further notice.
With special guests.
Yes, we are going to have a special guest next time. Our most recurring guest at this point, Nick Hawden, who's been on. I think this will be his 3rd episode. So he's come back quite a few times to rejoin the show.
Hype.
Well, stuck in the grimy cities we are. In episode, what episode?
94.
94 of Cookie Pocket. Bye.